Okay, let's leave Visual Studio behind for the time being. Let's just look at DBL itself. Hasn't been a huge amount of stuff that's changed in the low-level language, but a few things worthy of calling out. One of the new features is in 10.3.3c the addition of a new syntax for simple properties. The property syntax that you can see towards the top of the slide there is the original declare a backing field, have a get method and a set method and so on. And very often, if that's all you want to do and you don't need to include any additional code in the prop divisions of the get or the set method, we had an abbreviated syntax of that previously where you could specify an empty procedure division and not use the backing field and things like that, and it would simplify the process. Now we've got it down to a single line, essentially. So the example at the top there, public read-write property, name, comma, type. So if you just need a simple property that has an implicit backing field there of certain types, then that's a very nice syntax. The various snippets, I think there's a couple of snippets that generate this kind of syntax, have been updated. And there are also some modifiers that you can see on the lower left of the slide there. So the keywords read-write will give you a property that has a get and a set method. Read-only only has a get method. Set protected has a public get method but a protected set method, and so on. So it's pretty flexible and you can achieve pretty much what you want using that, and makes for significantly more concise code. Another area that received a lot of work, and it's kind of one of those behind-the-scenes things that isn't like a wow thing, but in certain situations it really can be. A lot of work went into doing some performance enhancements in the sort feature. And the end result, it turns out, has been a pretty significant performance improvement, especially when processing large files. The change was basically to change the way that it allocates and uses memory as a cache. Previously, you could specify a limit and say you can use this amount of memory. It's been changed to a more dynamic algorithm, so it can allocate more memory if it wants to. So we've introduced a new setting which is sort mem max. So now you're not saying this is your cache, you're saying you can use up to this amount and it can allocate more if it needs it. We're defaulting to 4 megabytes on Unix and 64 megabytes on Windows as a maximum, but then again you can configure that through that new setting. And we're starting to see some pretty huge benefits. We were seeing in processing very large files up to a 10 times performance increase. So yeah, potentially doing a verify or doing a reload of an ISAM file on 10.3.3c, we're starting to see some performance benefits. So things that can benefit from that are the sort statement in the language itself, even via XF Server if it's a remote sort to Windows or Unix. The select class also uses sort if you're doing order by ascending or order by descending, and also the ISUtil and fconvert utilities benefit from these features. Specifically, the ISUtil and fconvert utilities, because they're more of an offline system management thing, we let them use a little bit more memory by default on Unix anyway. So we default to 64 megs of cache on both systems for those things, and we do not imply the restriction from sort mem max. So you can use sort mem max for the sort setting for your application, but when you run the file management utilities, you can have it use more. It will use more by default, even if you've constrained it down. And if you want to alter the defaults, there's an ISAM utilities, I guess, IU sort mem max, so that you can specifically control to enhance your file optimization procedures. Another thing that was introduced, this one isn't brand new in 10.3.3c, it was in the 10.3.3 release, but it's certainly worthy of calling out, is the new ability to do runtime version targeting. So what this essentially means is there is a new option that allows you to say, okay, even though I'm using the very latest and greatest 10.3.3c, I would like to produce DBO files and DBR files and ELB files and so on that are compatible with 10.1 or compatible with 9.5 or whatever base runtime version you want to support. So this gives you guys a way of taking the latest and greatest tools and getting access to those latest and greatest features for those customers who do have up-to-date versions, and still being able to build a version of your software that will run on 10.1 or 9.5 or whatever it is you want to use. With traditional Synergy, you can target all the way back to version 9.5. With Synergy.net, you can target all the way back to 10.1.1 if you really want to. Although in .net, it's probably easier for you guys to keep up to date anyway and do more frequent rebuilds and keep up to date on those versions. We certainly encourage that. You know, a lot of improvements have gone into the .net environment since 10.1. A new thing in 10.3.3c is the ability to test for that targeted runtime version. So there is a new runtime target define that is put in place by the compiler when you compile. So if you say target runtime 9.5, the define will indicate that within code. So what this allows you to do is conditional code based on the runtime that you're targeting. So you can say, if runtime target is 10.3.3b, then let's go off and use the select class joins, and if not, we'll have to write that code some other way manually and have the old loop that does it manually, or something along those lines. So that's a very nice feature. As you can see also in Visual Studio that some work was done to take note of those if-def settings, so the fact that this code is grayed out here is because it's not meeting that .define, so you get visual indications of what will and won't be compiled in the current environments as well. A couple of things to call out, just because more and more people are interacting with web services and things like that and using the XML API and the HTTP API to do that from traditional Synergy. There were a couple of very nice routines added in 10.3.3 that just ease the process of moving in and out of memory handles and things like that. Frequently it was a problem when you receive a large amount of data from some remote call and you've got over the 64K limit that are in some environments, and now you've got to start accessing 64K chunks and that kind of stuff. So these routines, handle from string and string from handle, just allow you to easily go between a memory handle and a string and a memory handle without having any concern about those platforms where 64K limits are getting in your way. Obviously, another change that goes back to 10.3.3 is the addition of support for joins between files when you're dealing with the select class. So basically building up a single code construct that is accessing 2 or 3 or more ISAM files at the same time and following logical relationships through keys and so on. So that was a 10.3.3 feature, and this is a runtime feature, so you do need to target the 10.3.3 runtime if you want to get access to this feature. There have been some fairly significant improvements in that whole environment in all of the patch releases since 10.3.3, including 10.3.3c. So again, if you're using select joins, we'd really seriously suggest that you get up to 10.3.3c as soon as you can, because there have been some fairly major improvements. There was also a new sparse class that really improved the mechanism for doing sparse selects. So a sparse select is where you select only a couple of fields from a whole record, for example, and it only brings those information back over the wire. And there's a whole new mechanism with the sparse class to let you express what you want to do in code in a more flexible way. I'm not going to linger on joins. There's just a very simple example of doing a join. The joins are implemented or expressed with the from class. Essentially, you're saying I want to select data from one class and then from .inner join or from .left join, depending on what you're trying to achieve, and expressing another folder. So here you can see the example is we're selecting from the vendor file and then inner joining to a new from of the order file and retrieving vendors and orders at the same time. And obviously the inner join versus the left join is basically saying, do we always bring back the vendors or do we only bring back vendors who have orders? Is essentially the difference, just like with SQL. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot more detail because Richard's got a whole session on accessing data later in the conference and he will bring us all up to date on that.